Hi, good morning everyone. This is Steven Arintano. The topic is all about the Philippines and the Chinese Mestizo. So as we can see, the vocabulary words, first one is pacto de letro. It is a contract of sale which stipulated that the seller shall have the right to buy back the property within the agreed period. He may repurchase the property within the period stipulated in a contract by which cannot exceed 10 years. Second, Chinese Mestizo. Any person born of Chinese father and the Indian mother was classified as Chinese Mestizo. Subsequent descendants were listed as a Chinese Mestizo. A Chinese Mestiza who married a Chinese or Mestizo as well as their children as well registered as a Mestizo. Third is Indio, a member of any of indigenous people of America or Eastern Asia in areas formerly subject to Spain or Portugal. And the fourth one is Indulto de Comercio, or privilege of trading. Next, information about Chinese Mestizo played an important in the creation and evolution of what is now called the Filipino nation. They played a significant role in the formation of the Filipino middle class, in the aggregations of reforms in the 1998 revolution, and in the formation of what is known as the Filipino nationality. Filipinos with Chinese blood have occupied important position in the government. So here is another information. There were already a lot of political figures dominating the highest position in the government, like Sergio Osmeña, who became the vice president of the Philippine Commonwealth. A number of Chinese mestizos have become president: Jose P. Laurel, Elpidio Quirino, Ramon Magsaysay, and Ferdinand E. Marcos. Chinese mestizos provide to be more significant element in the Philippine society for the reasons. So here are another types or another reasons. First one is Chinese Mestizo was the more numerous as there was a greater infusion of Chinese blood than any other blood in the Filipino. Chinese Mestizo were readily assimilated into the fabric of native society. Third is they assume important roles in the economic, social, political life of the nations. So on, although the Chinese who settled in the island before the Spanish colonizations had intermarried with native women, the emergence of Chinese mestizos as legally distinct class began only with the Spanish colonial regimes. Soon after, the Spaniards founded the city of Manila in 1571. A large Chinese colony involved performing multiple services as trader, and domestic servant. The Chinese become indispensable to needs of the capital. However, the Spaniards could only see the rapid increase of Chinese population as a potential threat to their own rule. They feared that Chinese would far less loyal to the Spanish regime. It caused dilemma because they wanted the Chinese for their indispensable service in the economic and yet were suspicious and wary of their growing number. The dilemma was resolved through the policy of converting the Chinese and encouraging marriages between Catholic Chinese and Catholic Indio. Any person born of Chinese father and Indio mother was classified as Chinese mestizo. Subsequent descendants were listed as a Chinese mestizo. A mestiza who married a Chinese or mestizo as well as their children was registered as a mestizo. But a Chinese mestiza who married an Indio was listed together with children and Indio. As their Chinese mestizo population increased, the question of their legal status arose. In 1740, inhabitants of the Philippines were classified into three classes. First one is Spaniard, then second Indio, and the last but not the least Chinese. So here is another information. In the 1741, the legal status of Chinese mestizo was resolved when the whole population was reclassified for the purpose of tributes or tax payment in four classes. So here is another Spaniard and Spanish Mestizo exempted. Chinese pay 3 times for the tax that Indians are paying. Chinese Mestizo is paid 2 times for the tax that Indians are paying. Indians pay the less tax, or so yun, konti lang talaga yung, pero exempted yung ano. So another is John Bowring described Chinese Mestizo as more active and enterprise, more prudent and pioneering, more oriented to trade and commerce than the Indians. For Fyodor Tagore called the Chinese Mestizo as the richest and most enterprise portion of the entire population. Or W.G. Palgrave commented in the 1876, the Chinese Mestizo as intellectually they are superior to the unmixed around them, their member taken in comparisons with that of the entire population is not great, but their wealth and influence go far to make up this deficiency. So in 1760, expulsions of many Chinese because of their cooperations with the British government, who occupied in Manila and led energetic and enterprising Chinese Mestizo to penetrate markets which had been reserved by the Chinese. In the absence of Chinese trades, the Chinese Mestizo became the provisioner of the colonial authorities. Foreign firm and resident Manila of Chinese Mestizo also engaged in holding the wholesaling. Chinese Mestizo intended to dominate not only in economic, social, but also in political leadership of the local community. One thing is the rise of middle class or Chinese Mestizo to social prestige. So ito. The Chinese population was many times larger than of the Spanish, making fear of Chinese revolt. Spaniard tried addressed by converting Chinese people to Catholicism. The Spaniards aimed to develop mission field in Chinese to spread Catholicism. In order for the Chinese not to resist, the Spaniard offered marriage and permanent resettlement in the Philippines. This forced almost all the Chinese to make marriage to the Filipinos, resulting in the rise of Chinese Mestizo. The Chinese Mestizo gave way to a community in Binondo, Manila. So, tindaan lang ninyo do, center a Chinese community, which is the Binondo, Manila here in the Philippines. So another information, the new middle class would express themselves in novel artist terms. New middle class followed by model Hispanic European culture and was getting entrance in many publics or town. According to the Wikipedians, the wealth they acquired, that the manner they spent it made them the arbiter of fashions, costumes, and style of living. John Bowring wrote in 1850 that many teams adopt the European customs, but were they retired, the native dress that is finer in quality, gayer in color, and richer in ornament. The man community or European has the stocking. The rise of the middle class to economic importance had other greater effect. The acquisitions of a certain amount of wealth made it easier to provide education for their children. In the 1970s, more families were able to send their children to Spain and later to progressive countries like France, England, Australia, and Germany. So there is one, Mestizo defined as a rich people. The term Mestizo is associated with people there is a social prestige attached to being considered in Chinese Mestizo. An example of this is the capital Tiago from Rizal, Nole Metangere. He is an Indio who is to be regarded as a Chinese Mestizo and was able to purchase a place in the wealthy and famous Gremio de Mestizos de Binondo. So, the Chinese Mestizo in the formation of the Filipino identity. So, ito yung information niya. The Chinese Mestizo getting wealthy to independent-minded, sizable, enough to form their own Gremio Mestizo de Sangle by 18th century. Chinese Mestizo in the province began to set the tone of public opinion in 1827. Manila Bernaldez Pinzaro already observed that the Indio and Mestizo clerics and dangerous tendency to revolution. Chinese Mestizo is a politician nucleus around which the Indio insurrections might be organized, and predicted that the Chinese Mestizo would in time dominate public opinion. So within the threat of Chinese Mestizo, and Indo-Spanish government applied measure, the government fought with pressure or raised hatred between the Chinese Mestizo and native to separate the two classes. They believe that they should be separate because first one is native is strong in its number. Second, the Chinese Mestizo is intelligent and wealthy. Third, the authority such as promoting rivalry and jealousy, and to foment the antagonism between the two classes. So declared rank governed Hilo for the Indio superior to that meant of the Mestizo, have separate treats for each by which they should attack the ridiculous each other. 6 is impose land taxes on the Chinese Mestizo and a districted dress for them. Yet it was difficult to separate two groups, as Chinese Mestizo were inclined to identify themselves with the Indios culturally and socially, and gravitate towards each other due to commonly grievances. So, significance of Chinese Mestizo in the Philippines, land rib. So, the development of Chinese Mestizo in the Philippines can be understood by studying stories of Chinese in the Philippines by 1741. Chinese Mestizo had been also recognized as a distinct element in the Philippine society. Most of the profit of Chinese Mestizo come from lending loan, tools, and equipment, or for Indians to work. These have interest rates that quickly give them money. Another way of gaining profits of the Chinese Mestizo is the pacto de retro, which means that the Indio will pound his land to the Chinese Mestizo for cash with options to repurchase in the future. Since the Indio cannot pay the loan, the land will went by default on the Chinese Mestizo. So yun yung informations about. By the middle of the 19th century, the Chinese Mestizo have the strongest position as ever, only second to the provincial governors. They have acquired much of lands in the Philippines. Second, the only religious order that their fear states, according to the Bowring Chinese Mestizo, are the most industrious, preserving an colonial element in the Philippine population, was the Chinese Mestizo who made Cebu wealthy. These people have the forecast. So, in the Philippines, secondly, to the religious order and fear, friars states, according to the Bowring Chinese Mestizo, are the most industrious, preserving, and economical elements in the Philippines. Population, it was the Chinese Mestizo who made Cebu wealthy. These peoples have purchased locally products from neighboring towns like Samar and Leyte to sell to the foreign merchants, which leads to the property of Cebu, is prosperity of the Cebu. The city of Cebu is called not have thrived without the Chinese Mestizo. So yun, so full of Chinese Mestizo. So in the information, in the 1844, the Spanish government revoked the Indulto de Comercio, and this forbade the Spanish officials to involve themselves in trading. This should have removed the obstacles for complete dominance of the Chinese Mestizo over trade, but it was not. The Chinese come back as the Spanish policy pushed aside that barriers to Chinese immigrations and residents by 1880s. The sense of Chinese population and soared to 100,000 and were found in every corner of the Philippines. The Chinese mestizos were widely forced out of business by Chinese competition and shifted their attention to agriculture. The advantage in trading of the Chinese mestizos are now gone as there is now direct international trading in the Philippines, which eliminated the role of middleman interland trader of the Chinese mestizo. The Chinese mestizo lost one of their specialties, which is the commerce. In the face of the Chinese competition, the Chinese method of buying raw materials and distributing imports were superior to the method used by mestizo. Chinese mestizo as a threat to Spaniard land grab. So within the rise of the mestizo to positions of influence, prestige, the relations with the Indians become the matter of increasing concern to the Spanish. The Chinese mestizo have the money and brain, have the close relationship with the Indians, while Indians have strength in their numbers. This poses the great threat for the Spaniards. Summary and conclusions. The Chinese mestizo played an important part in the creation and evolution of what is now called the Filipino nation. According to Ferdinand Jesus Mereno, the Filipino nationality, no matter how Malayan it might be, it's the main ethnic stock, no matter how Spanish and Christians it might be in its inspiration, civilization, and religion, no matter how American it might be in politics, trade, and aspiration, has been historical and practical, shaped not by Chinese immigrant, but the Chinese mestizo, performing the multiple service as traders, artisans, and domestic servant. The Chinese become indispensable to the needs of the capital. So here is the encouraged to come and settle. The Chinese population increased by leaps and but the Spaniards could only see this rapid increase a potential threat to their own rule. They feared that the Chinese, being an ethnic group with roots in China, would be far less loyal to the Spanish regime than the Christianized native whom the Spaniards called Indios through their colonial rules. Brief knowledge how Rizal related to Chinese mestizo. The lineage history of Jose Rizal is given by Austin Craig. Purely in terms of his ancestry, Rizal might be considered as fifth-generation Chinese mestizo. His paternal ancestor at Catholics, Chinese named Domingo Lamco, married a Chinese mestiza. Their son and grandsons both married Chinese mestizo. These grandsons have achieved wealth and status. His locally was able to have his family transferred from the mestizo padron or tax census registered so that the Indios, thus Rizal father and Rizal himself, were considered Indio. So summary of ethnic racial categories. Racial category used in during the Spanish period toward Chinese mestizo, and Indio. So here is the sample of summary. First one is ethical racial categories, starting with Spaniard, pure-blooded Spaniard, exempted in the paying tax. So this is Spanish mestizo, personal born with whose parents were Spaniards, exempted in paying tax. Chinese, pure-blooded Chinese, pay 3 times of the tax that Indians are paying. Chinese mestizo, person born of the Chinese father and an Indian mother, was classified as Chinese mestizo, paying 2 times of the tax that Indians are paying. So Indios is a person born of the Filipino father, was classified as Indio. And additional information about Chinese mestizas who married a Filipino Indio, she is and descendant will be considered as Indio. Pay the tax less. So here is the reference. So yun, thank you, that's all. I hope you listening.